No lizards. No aliens. No nonsense. This is Reality Bytes.
Okay, it seems we're live again. Welcome back to Reality Bytes for the third time. And still got Alan Watts and doing all kind of technical things to try and get back up recordings just in case this doesn't work. But anyway, we'll start again. Talking about Ireland and the protest that's been going on there over the past few weeks. Up to 10,000 people a couple of weeks ago, and the latest protest being outside the studios of RTE, the main television and radio provider in Ireland, similar to the BBC in England. And I was wondering if the elites would expect this type of thing, because it's not the usual thing you see across Europe. It's mainly mass protests in the street. There's nobody actually targeting any specific institution, if you like. And it's good to see that people in Ireland are actually realising that RTE are now the enemy, and always have been. And it's pretty obvious with the reporting of the previous demonstrations, protests, which cited a couple of hundred people actually outside Custom House, when the pictures clearly showed thousands of people. And that was the reporting that RTE did. And of course they marred that reporting with the Antifa scuffles, which came to nothing, really. And Antifa, of course, become the supporters of the government, apparently, because they seem to turn up at every anti-government demonstration supporting the other side, which is quite strange considering they're trying to bring down governments. But Scotland, on the other hand, I know you've talked about the Irish problem, the Scottish problem, etc. in the past, Alan, and Scotland seems to have conquered completely. There doesn't seem to be any resistance there at all, unless you know of any.
No.
But my son says nothing's happening there, and everybody's just complying. Mm-hmm. England is a funny mix, I think. There seems to be some things happening in London and Manchester and other places, but nothing really like this that grabs the attention, apart from the hijacked event in London at the weekend with the usual suspect turning up and. Well, he didn't mention lizards, but he may as well have. But there was a speaker there who mentioned closing the schools, which was a bit of a giveaway, because that's exactly what they want to do. And it struck me that maybe Ireland's on the right track, and it takes a small country, maybe even an island, to actually fight back and say enough's enough. The government in Ireland has been corrupt for years. It was corrupt when I was there, and it's still the same people in power. They're just switching them around, giving each other a turn. But you've spoken about the Irish problem in the past and the English problem, and you've mentioned the Scottish problem, and you've mentioned that there's something about the Celts that doesn't like taking orders from people, basically, and won't be walked over. And as I say, Scotland seems to have been walked over, but the Irish are still going. What would you put that down to?
It's, well, Scotland was gone a long time ago, really. It was the SNP was a Trojan horse, you know. It was, again, to get the people to really vote for Scottish independence, which isn't independence, as you know. The same as Ireland. You don't wake up from independence into the European Union, which is an even bigger group of fanatics at the top. And so they fell for it, and when you look at all the members of the SNP at the top, they used to be called the Communist Party. That's what they used to be, these characters. They're international, that's their slogan, international socialism. And folk have no idea that communism basically was set up and advised with a Comintern years ago and so on to get back to their own countries after the meetings in Moscow. They come back, like Pierre Trudeau did. He led the Communist Party for Canada in 1952 over to Moscow and came back, and then they ran as liberals, you see. That was the trick to it. So get in by any means you can, and once you're in, you start to implement the international agenda, which again is almost like an open border system, and masses of migration and displacement of your own people in a sense too. This idea of cheap labour doesn't really wash. Lots of the labour that came in, it wasn't needed in the first place, and that was flooding in even after World War II. But once SNP got up and running, they promise you a wonderful utopia, as always, to get everybody on board with it. And they push women's rights and all these rights for all these different people. And before you know it, you've got people coming into the country that get positions in. I think I heard recently, in fact, that the SNP were giving the votes to people outside the country. I mean, what kind of nation is it? It's not a nation, you see, anymore. Pretty well destroyed. Ireland still had the remnants of religion, you see, even though it was hammered and hammered for a long, long time. The communists' biggest enemy always was religion. Religion gave them a basis of culture, a cohesive culture, which was awfully hard to destroy. Even when you pretty well took most of the religion away, the culture was still there. It was based on the religion, you see. And so that's why they haven't been able to completely annihilate Ireland yet. But they're really going at it pretty good. They put all the right Trojans in again into the government systems across the board. And they're all paid off from outside sources. That's the big one too. I mean, massive funding from all outside sources to individuals. We don't live in any kind of democracy. We've lived in a almost a hypnotic state since World War II, since the big world organization that really runs the world, which you see at the WEF, the World Economic Forum. They're quite open about their agenda, and it is based on a form of technocracy. And technocracy in the 1930s was a form of communism, a more perfected form of where communism was supposed to go, where experts would rule the world, you see. And you find it, I think Elon Musk's grandfather, or even father, was part of this system too, and was thrown out of Canada at one point in the 1930s for subversion. So their idea is to take over the world's resources, which tied right in if you look at the Lord Alfred Milner group that came out with the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the British Empire, they ran the British Empire, this private club that morphed into the Royal Institute of International Affairs with an American branch called the CFR. They take over the world's resources, everything you need to live as a human being, individually and collectively in a nation. They would take over as food supplies, that's all energy. And don't forget that food is energy. and your heating, electricity, gas, whatever you're using, all energy would be controlled by them. That's exactly what's coming out of the World Economic Forum today, with the big crew that decided they have the right to rule the world. And behind all the sustainability for climate change is the same group that simply changed it into COVID, post-COVID, and austerity. It's the same bunch. We're the problem. Too many of you. That's what they say, you know. It's always been on their own website. They go into this in quite good detail with Klaus Schwab prattling off his the same old mantra. There's too many of you, and that's the world's problem. So they're going to make you come to a decision where you're going to accept sterilization. I really mean that. That's where it's all going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's many ways to sterilize people, and abortion is one of them.
Yes.
And they've been pushing that hard in Ireland for the last 5 or 6 years, or well, longer than that actually. But they've really been pushing it hard.
Well, they're also definitely going to do. They said at the last meeting last year, for the same crew, as I say, WEF is the same crew that runs all the climate change agenda and so on, same bunch, and the Club of Rome with them. And but they said last year that the people were not listening to their advice, as they said, you know, of cutting back on consumerism and so on. And so they'd have to do something more drastic to make the people listen. And bingo, you get COVID breaking out around November, December. And here we go into rationing, you know, regimentation of the public in a wartime scenario. So it's all out there. And don't forget, too, that Bertrand Russell, this is a big group that's been on the go since before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II, that runs the world. Same group. And Russell himself, who belonged to all these groups, talked about bringing in a form of credit control. He gave you credits issued by the state. Today it's universal social credit system, and you get paid that every month. You get paid not to work even, you know. That's the 1940s and 50s they talked about this. So they're unfolding the whole agenda, under the guise of COVID, that they couldn't get through with sustainability and the climate change agreements. Under the climate change agreements, they said last year again that humanity was the problem. Too many of you. Yeah. So, and then the Club of Rome came out right after COVID broke out and said we'll achieve all our goals for sustainability using COVID, and that's exactly what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you mentioned on your broadcast on Sunday, you talked about the rationing and the rationing of fuel during the war years.
Yes.
In particular, and how it continued after for quite a long time. And I was speaking to a lady in the supermarket yesterday. It's quite unusual. And she was talking about she wasn't going to use self-service checkouts, blah, blah, blah. And she was buying me in one of these disabled carts. And they just chatted for a few minutes, and then she suddenly turned around to me and said, how did you get here without a mask? And I said, because I just ignore them. She says, you just ignore them? I said, yeah, you just walk in the door and don't listen to what they say. I said, I've never worn one.
Yeah.
You know, she said, oh. She said, I was at a meeting yesterday, an educational course or something she was on, and said there was about 25 people there, and about a third of them had masks on. And the lecturer stood up and said, before we start, I've been doing this class for 10 years, 3 days a week, and I've never asked anybody to wear a muzzle. So if you don't want to wear that thing, take it off.
Yeah.
By the end of the class, nobody was wearing one. But I just thought I'd throw that in there because there's some positivity somewhere, you know.
Yes.
But, getting back to England, I mean, England's a funny mix of people anyway, but there seems to be... I would have thought that the north of England would have been protesting a lot more than they are, as opposed to the south, because the south is still pretty affluent compared to the rest of Britain.
Sure.
And they've not really... when a recession hits there, they get brought down to the high levels that the people up north usually thought they enjoyed.
Yeah.
But they don't really suffer that much. But and it's not really hit them yet. Do you think that, in particular, the Irish, because it's an island, it's for the elites. It's kind of a target because it's an island and it's easy to shut it down. It's easy to stop, obviously, food getting in and stuff like that, and fuel, for that matter. Do you think the rationing could come in there first, or somewhere similar that they can shut off easy?
They've enough operatives in Ireland managing the system that they could do it, sure. And they certainly do have operatives inside the system. Ireland has had its operatives in there since even before World War II. Running the system. It's a covert system we're living under. You have one that they call democracy, which folk actually think exists, and the other one is the one that really runs the system. And you find, I've got books going back to one especially is the 1930s, 1937. It's published by the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was for the British Empire, the future of the British Empire. But what it was a book about the transition from the power of Britain having its sole, naval power and the whole thing, an old empire, and sharing it with the United States, so that the members of the Council on Foreign Relations there, that's the American branch of the same group, talking about the future. And the war hadn't started, but they talked about the coming war with Japan. That was in the book. All the members who attended, with their names are on the back, all the top politicians, top bankers, central bankers of every country attended this. And the top Communist Party members, because remember Quigley said the same thing, we don't mind, we've got communists, fascists and dictators, and we don't mind all these different members of the group. That's how you run the world. The terminology is mainly to distract the public, the general public. They're kind of puppets in a sense. And feints, like boxing feints. We get carried away with the terms, we lose track of what they really are. But they're all used for the same purpose. So they talked about a post-World War II system in the book. It's a big, thick book too, for members. And they talked about restructuring after the war, which hadn't started, remember, with Germany either. After the war, they restructured the culture of Europe. And that's exactly what they did with Hopkins, who worked for FDR during the war, setting up a system they'd introduced into Japan and Germany after the war, where they'd eradicate their history, and they'd teach children that there was no history. I mean, very much like the communists would do, Year Zero. And the only history was something that was ominous and bad, so you mustn't be taught it. It was too upsetting, so you weren't taught it. So, but it wasn't just for them. Like Quigley said himself in his own books, who was a member of the same organization, he said, all sides in a war are used for change. He's admitting that there's groups above all this that cause and bring on the wars, and then they direct the changes which they desire and which they've planned. And that's what they use it for. That's how it's done.
Yeah. You mentioned Germany there, and it's interesting that Germany has been made to feel guilty. The youth in Germany particularly have been made to feel guilty about the atrocities of the past when it's got nothing to do with them.
Absolutely.
And 80 years ago now. And it's good to see so many of them start to get out on the streets and say, no, we're not going back to that. So obviously that eradication of history is not quite worked. Yeah. And a lot still remember.
It's lucky. I mean, actually, it was really a lot to do. This is the double whammy with the internet, which is now heavily censored. But at least in the internet, there was ways of communicating material to people of their history and their past. They didn't know. And what a shock it would be to be the age of 40 sometimes, and for the first time you're hearing a history that you didn't even know existed in your own country, But I take the same idea and put it across the world. We're all given fake histories, pretty well, and to a great extent, because we're managed by this supranational organization. They do have their members. I've met some of them, and I've talked to them. And one of them actually was the head of the WHO a few years ago, and a head of lots of other organizations. They rotate them around like musical chairs to these organizations. And these people are unelected, and they become heads of countries and heads of the United Nations at times as well. So they do exist, and they call themselves different names, like the Guardians, and the Elders is another group. Sounds very, very innocuous, the Elders. Oh, that's just old. No. These people literally have everything that's happened with the United Nations and all the agreements and sustainability and all the rest of it. It comes from them. They tell other organizations what to do, and their own. They have a site up there, by the way. You can look it up, and again, it's misleading because it's exoteric for the public. You'll think they're just ex-important people that all know each other, like Maggie Thatcher. She was a member of it too. But in reality, they dictate to the other ones. They have power to put people in positions of power inside these countries. So never, these are the same people who pushed for opening the doors completely for mass migrations from Africa and India into Europe in the last few years, That's a lot of power you have.
Well, I was going to mention that because I don't know if you saw the thing about Sweden that's happened recently with supposedly somebody burning a Quran and it set off riots in, I think it was Malmo. Yeah, and I thought that's just what we need right now. One of these uprisings again. But again, it's like Sweden being punished for not locking down its citizens. We'll set off something like that and cause them trouble. Sure. And maybe it'll spread across Europe. Who knows? There's enough Muslims in Europe to cause that kind of trouble.
Of course.
So of course that won't be frowned upon. That'll be religious freedom or something. Yeah. But going back to Ireland, now they've brought in a law that only 15 people can gather outdoors. 15. And any organisers of protests can now be fined about 10,000 euros or something. So I've said to the lads in Ireland, what you need is 1,000 organisers with 15 people apiece. Yes. Get around it that way. So you can't get fined. And if all those 15 people just happen to meet together, well, that's just coincidence.
There you go.
So
isn't that something though?
Yeah, but 15 people, that's got to include a restaurant with outside seating. Of course. You can't have 15 people.
Well, see, the people are doing it all wrong, What you have to do is get black jeans and T-shirts and face masks and just say you're having a demonstration, and have
with matches.
Yeah, with matches, yeah. And they'll leave you alone. The cops won't go near you, And you can just have a party and just say you're talking party politics. It's quite simple.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it was good to see the police in Ireland kind of stood back a little bit and let events ensue. And when it got a little bit out of hand, they stepped in and protected Antifa people from further beatings, shall we say.
There you go.
I think the Irish have got the right idea. Just get them in a corner and beat them in the place, basically.
Well, I watched it leading up to it, and what got me is I know quite a few people in Ireland, and some people who'd come in as migrants to Africa, from Africa in Ireland. They're all talking about something, and I want you to see what they're on about. It's because some of them had been stabbing white folk in Ireland during the Black Lives Matter raid, pulling down the statues and stuff. They actually were stabbing some folk. They'd picked on some young guy and his girlfriend, and so they were divided on where to applaud the guy that did the stabbings on the white fella, or if it was going too far. I mean, this is all generated from outside the countries, as you know, by the folk who really run and bring them in and finance them. And we know the names of a lot of them too. They're doing it.
Yeah. The video of that stabbing was quite horrific. And,
yes.
How that got past the censors on Facebook and all that, I don't know. But there you go, it was up there. And apparently the guy that did it was bragging about it on Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of things. And he was arrested and released.
That's right.
As far as I know, nothing was ever done about it.
It won't be, You see, you've got paid. I'm afraid to say your judges are paid off literally from external sources. It's the same with people can't figure out why these mayors in the States and so on, and the politicians and the Democrats are on board exactly, sworn to the same agenda that makes no sense to the public. It's because they're getting paid for it. This is what they're bought and paid for, all of them. The folk have a hard time believing this, but that's how it really works,
Yeah, it's funny. I mentioned to you in an email that I've been down to the City Hall to state my case why we should be mandating masks, etc. And went in there knowing full well that they were going to mandate it anyway, but it's good to get it on the record that you're giving them evidence, etc.
Sure.
So they can't turn around and say they didn't know when something does happen.
Yeah.
But I came back and I looked up because Paul was going, you should run for office now. So I'm not interested in that, blah, blah, blah. But just out of curiosity, I looked up when the next election was. Because one of the ladies there was basically making racist remarks about the city next door, the next city to us. Basically saying we don't want them coming in here spreading the disease.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a thing to say. And she's a black lady. I thought, if a white guy had said that, it should be more.
I know.
But anyway, I went back to see when she was supposed to be up for re-election, and apparently her term ended this May.
Yeah.
And so did the deputy mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not even supposed to be sitting on the commission, but they're there making decisions. So I don't know how that works. I've got to look into that and say, when does your term finish? As far as I can see on your own website, it's already done. So how do you make decisions?
Sure. See, people don't realise that you're living in, it's all called perception management. And through television, a very old science, nowadays anyway, you can literally create whole misperceptions actually, but directed misperceptions you want the public to believe in. You can get a small group and make them appear like there's thousands there. And look at the BBC that's used mass gatherings in India and used it as pretending it was in Iraq at one time after 9/11. But these were actually mass gatherings in India for something totally different. And they tried to pretend that, look at these thousands of people happy and rejoicing that the US has been attacked. No, it wasn't. It's completely fake, and they stole it from a different demonstration inside India. This happens all the time, so it's perception management. The general population have been raised, as I've mentioned this before, to be literally naive and to believe the mainstream media is an authority. When I was growing up, every working person knew who owned the different newspapers. They knew. Because a lot of them had gone through the 1930s as young men, my parents' age, and the 40s, the war and all the rest of it. So they realized that all information was a propaganda war. And they knew who was who. And in Britain, of course, you had complete cartels that ran the whole system. It was very much like Hollinger in Canada and the States, with Conrad Black and a lot of reporters underneath them that ran stacks of newspapers all the way to Israel, in fact. So, but nowadays they've done such a good job to bring it back to now we're the authority, Solely because they're on every night of the week, the same characters giving you the news, they are the authority. And it's perception management. So yeah, you don't realize you're living through a play, and I really mean that's a play. What you do with big plans to change your countries, never mind the fact you've set up all the top politicians, they're all bought and paid for. Quigley said it too, and he applauded it, he was all for it. He didn't believe that the people had the right to sort of choose things for themselves. But if you take everything that's been happening in this since last year even, and before, never mind all the other things leading up to it, sustainability was the mantra. There's too many people, Club of Rome, etc., they want a post-industrial, a post-consumerist society going into austerity. They signed all the agreements in the United Nations years ago, and did all the radio shows on it, explaining it to the public. Well, here it is. So, but as I say, look at the COVID thing. It broke out after Trump did one thing right. Whoever's managing him, whoever it might be, they did one thing right, and that was that he pulled out of the climate change agreement. Well, that's when all hell broke loose, because they just had their meeting. They publicised that Soros had an emergency meeting with WEF and went on and saying Trump is the greatest danger to the world right now. Now, he's speaking with and on behalf of every top corporation on this planet. They belong to the WEF and the WHO. They're all in bed. It's all one big organisation. Bill Gates is part of it too, And so COVID breaks out suddenly, And I thought at the time, now, is this an agreement with China and in the world? Because they gave us horrible video coming out of China, of all places, where they can censor anything. Nothing comes out there once they want to, And I thought, these folk dropping dead in the streets, supposedly, and yada, and big machines going down streets, blowing this mist hundreds of feet up into the air, and it's all. Well, this is what they showed. They're getting us prepared for the terror, you see. And I thought, are they all working together? And well, they are all working together because we're supposed to merge with China into global society. China's supposed to take over as a policeman of the world after all this. Well, how do you bring America down to make China the supreme power? Well, you bring it into poverty, all commerce stops, almost, Bring them into a wartime scenario, an internal wartime scenario, using COVID. Famine breaks out, rationing breaks out, all this completely, they're calling it, by the way, reimagining society from the WEF. That's where it came out of. Bill Gates put his programs out for children to learn through the computer at home called Reimagining Education. So his programs literally are going to be used across the whole world to standardize one information system for every child on the planet, right out of UNESCO's idea, the old Julian Huxley idea. That's what it's for. So reimagining the police is, again, to eradicate the police forces, bring it, the military-industrial complex are all on board. That's why these generals are all on board with it in America, and they're not backing Trump. They're going into a world society. They'll still exist, and they're all paid lobbyists for the military-industrial corporations. So they're going to bring in all the electronic robots for the streets and so on. So it's all managed this way. Perception management. The general public must believe it's all real, it's all accidental view of history, right? You can reimagine 9/11 was just an accident, and it happened at a time when the PNAC group that published all the countries they wanted to take out in advance years before were in power at that time, so they could get started with their agenda. It's always an accident, so it's an accidental view of history. So accidentally, after the WEF came out with sustainability, we've got to go further and actually promote ideas to even encourage sterilization, voluntary amongst the people. And Trump comes out and says no to that. Bingo, you get COVID. And then the WEF comes out again with Soros with an emergency meeting, coming back with an extra speech. It's up on YouTube, I think. It's saying, here's a guy, you don't elect Soros, nobody elects him, but they're elected by the higher group that runs the planet. And no one's objecting to him at the top. Have you noticed that? No, not one person, not the CIA isn't objecting, because he's part of it. The FBI aren't objecting to Soros. If you were doing all this and you had the money, you would be one of these James Bond characters, like Spectre, these rich multi-billionaires that run the planet, because that's what he would appear to be. But he's part of a big organization that's funding literally terrorism within your own countries. This is astonishing to watch it happening. And they'll keep going. Internal riots, another perception management part. After the COVID thing, out came, it was the Black Lives Matter, not just in America, but across Britain, for goodness sake. You know, I mean, Britain really is the most lax place of all for migration. If you want to get ahead from coming outside of Britain into the country, there's all kinds of programs to elevate you above even ordinary people there without even paying for education. It's amazing, you know. So they use these armies to terrify the public. It's like a show of strength, and they're like armies, remember, being allowed to do what they did. That's the other key to it. The very fact they're allowed to do what they did tells you that this is all orchestrated and is authorized from very high powers above you. That's what it's about.
You saw us as part of the club when he bragged about bringing down the Bank of England, and MI5 and MI6 did nothing about it, because part of the remit is to protect the establishments, to protect the financial institutions, etc. And here's this guy bragging that he brought down the Bank of England and he's made millions of pounds on it.
That's right.
Nothing done about it.
Nothing, no.
And he's some private individual who just got lucky, I guess.
Well, it's always that way. It's accidental view, yeah. And don't forget that Britain brought him in. You know, when they all ran out of Europe and so on, went over to Britain, they gave him a free education in economics and all the rest. Well, again, London School of Economics, the usual. And then he goes into investments, and then he crashes the country's bank. And then he boasts about, and Britain had to borrow billions of pounds to bail themselves out because of what I and my two friends did, he says. I mean,
you talk about perception management and how it's created. We used to have it's called a city where we live, but it's really just a big town.
Yeah.
The main area of the town is really only, I'd say, a square mile if you're lucky. But it's spread out in the countryside. But it's rural mainly. But we used to have a local paper, and that was shut down a few years ago. And another city nearby was the next kind of local paper. So everybody now buys that instead of the one they used to buy, which is the one that covered this area. And I looked into who owned that, and it was the biggest newspaper owners in America.
Yes.
So of course, here's people thinking they've got a provincial newspaper giving them provincial news, and they get the same news as everybody else all across America. Basically, telling them what to think and what to believe and how bad it is here and how bad it is there or whatever, and how easily it's done. Because I'm sure that little paper in our town didn't cost much money for these people to take over.
Sure. And the thing too, again, you can go back into the 30s and even before that. I know the Rockefellers did it, the Rockefeller Foundation. And don't forget, Rockefeller's agenda was straight in line with the Royal Institute for International Affairs, take over the world's resources, give a limited amount out for public investment or shares and so on. But these corporations were to take over the world's necessary resources, you know. And that's what he did with Standard Oil. And of course, they tried to pretend that they did the antitrust laws and so on, and racketeering laws, and they pretended to divvy up their company when the government went after them for having too much power. But they simply, and it's been admitted by themselves too, they put out front CEOs with fake corporations they set up, buried under stacks of fronts and so on, until you get to the real information. And so they still ran all the oil industries and the gasoline and the petroleum industry, and all the drugs too that are made from petroleum. That was another big part of it too. So they created the EMA. But anyway, you're living through an amazing agenda, which is again admitted too. It's not conspiracy theory. It's quite open if you want to dig into it. It's just that because they own the media, you're not going to get your favourite newscaster that you've been raised with to trust, you know, coming on with the news telling you this kind of stuff. They won't do it because they're on the payroll. Of course they are, and they know it too. When I was small in Britain, there was a guy on the BBC who came on every night, and I can't remember his name. I know his face, but I couldn't believe it. When he was retiring, I was a child really, he was retiring. The accolades he got, I think he got an OBE or something from the Queen or something like that. And I thought all he did was get on and read the news. But you see, a whole generation had been raised believing in this guy as the real thing, an honest guy, a decent guy, a kind of guy that probably brought him through World War II with the same newsreels or something. And so they believed and trusted the guy. But he's reading scripts written by other people for him. That's how things really... And that's why they keep these anchor people on the go until they're dropping off the chair, or falling asleep on the set. And pay them so much money is because if you can keep them there for a long, long time... I mean, Walter Cronkite in the States was one of them. I mean, everything he opened his mouth, everybody believed him. They really believed him, It took years to convince the public to start believing private news companies. But today, it's completely accepted that they're all somehow part of the authoritarian natural system. But they're just as fake as they always were.
Yeah, I think part of the thing in Ireland is that what woke them up to that type of thing is because all this corruption was going on in the government, and the programme that's been going on there for years, the Late Late Show, and they put in one kind of celebrity presenter every so often, usually an employee of RTE, funnily enough, gets in there, and they bring in these politicians who've been accused of all sorts of nefarious acts, corruption, whatever, and they come on there and they give them such an easy time.
Yeah.
They don't ask the right questions, and this is supposedly a live programme, although there's a slight delay in it after somebody got on the stage and started doing something. But yeah, they gave them such an easy time, and Irish people start to see through it. Say, why aren't they asking them this question? Why aren't they asking them that question? And I think that's really what started their crusade, for want of a better word, against RTE, and I hope it continues because I think it's the way to go. And when they were there, I said, lads, you really need to batter down the doors and just take it out because that's what's going to have to happen. And I think it was I can't remember what the movies were, but there's been movies in the past or documentaries, or it's actually happened, where people have broken into TV studios and said, look, this is what's actually happening, and broadcast it live and see what happens. I don't know. But, maybe it takes that. Who knows?
Yeah, well, as I say, it's so... unfortunately, I've said this so many times, that the technique of conditioning children who become adults is almost perfect. And again, you can't stress enough about Aldous Huxley's comments on different TV shows he was on, and radio shows, and appearances at Berkeley for lectures and so on. He went through the system. And I think Mike Wallace's show he was on, and that's still up there somewhere, maybe else I've pulled it, where Aldous Huxley, don't forget, he called himself part of the scientific establishment that ruled the world. He mentioned there's a dominant minority at the top at Berkeley, He says there's a dominant minority, and underneath it you've got academia and a scientific elite. Now that included psychologists, behaviorists and so on. That managed the minds of the public, the Bernays types, even more advanced than that, of course. But in the 1960s, don't forget, on the Mike Wallace show, Aldous Huxley mentioned that the techniques even then were almost so perfect, and are going to get even more perfect or perfected, of conditioning the general public, and there wouldn't be all these sciences would be used against them so carefully and subtly and efficiently that they could make the public do and accept things that perhaps they shouldn't, that would be good for them. It was that good. You wouldn't even notice you were going along with something you shouldn't. But today it's so perfect. Look at the COVID. It's a good example, where they've militarized societies so quickly into utter submission, more so than they even had during World War II.
Yeah, well, it's amazing to be out and about in the stores. As I mentioned before, Paula doesn't really go out that much because she doesn't like shopping, literally, which is great. But she spends too much. But I go out, every day or 2 days, and it's just I'm still astonished that so many people are complying. But every time I see somebody without a mask, I make a comment. It's good to see you brought your brain out instead of a mask.
That's right.
Thing or whatever.
Yeah.
But getting on, sticking with the education theme, and this guy in London who was on that hijacked protest, shall we call it, who demanded the schools be closed, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
In, I think it was Tennessee here, the parents are now having to sign waivers to say that they will not be in the same room as the student while they're getting their lessons. And I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Eh?
I know.
It's just insane. But they're actually doing it. I mean, I think I'd be refusing to sign anything to say, well, hold on a minute, you wanted home education, you're getting home education, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
And but I'll be in charge of what comes through that computer screen.
Uh-huh.
And as you mentioned television before, how it's a weapon, and the flicker rate on the television.
Yeah.
And as the televisions have got more advanced, I'm sure that's working even better.
It's actually better because I did the old TV sets with the flicker rate and the frequency flicker and so on, where they used back then to bring them into subliminal states, you know. But once you got into high definition, that was so weaponized, because I read the stuff from the Pentagon on it, you know. They put a lot of literature out years ago on it, and maybe it's still up there, but they talked about what they could do with the high definition. Because you see, if you go into basic techniques of even meditation, you can change the states of your mind, the brain patterns of your mind, alpha, beta, and so on. And the old TV set could do that. That's when the children would sit and stare with their mouths wide open. You know, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds staring at TV or cartoons. Even when they changed to a different cartoon, they were hypnotized. And this is well understood in psychology and psychiatry and behaviorism. So anyway, once you brought in high definition, it literally, your eyes don't see like that. If you look at something close to you, the stuff in the background behind the object is more blurred. That's how your eyes operate. So in high definition, from the start of the picture, the closest objects and the further, they're all equally clear. So it alters the brain patterns, and it's well tested already. They knew it before they gave it to the public. It puts you in a different transic state almost. You're way more suggestible than you normally would be. And they know this. And time will pass, by the way. You'll lose track of time, and you won't know where it went. But the Pentagon went further, and the Pentagon admitted that they had a whole bunch of programs. This is like 15 years ago. And even later, where they could target people, or even the whole population, with pixel rates, concentrating with colors, very, very subtle colors, in certain parts of the screen that would affect different parts of your brain, and you really wouldn't be conscious of it because you're watching the story, you see. But they could actually manipulate the public. It was very effective and very efficient and workable, sure.
Yeah, well, that's where I was going to go with the teaching in the home on the computer.
Sure.
The computer monitors now are more advanced as well.
Yeah.
So they're getting into the high definition as well.
Of course.
So you can imagine a child sitting in the room, and the teacher can basically tell them anything.
Yeah.
And they'll be sitting in that catatonic state for however long the lesson is, 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
Right. Uh-huh.
And then they get a 5-minute break or whatever, and then they go on to the next one, and the next one, and on it goes, and they're sitting there for, before they know it, 6-7 hours.
Yeah.
And the parents got no input whatsoever, got no control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And these children, even if they actually go to the school, they're being taught not to share.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to share pencils and pens anymore. They're not allowed to even associate with each other. Their desks are 6 feet apart or whatever it is. They're not allowed to play outside. They're not allowed to do this, that, and the next thing. And they're being taught selfishness, and who knows how that's going to be backed up on the computer. What they're being really told. Well,
what it is was explained. It was explained back in the 1920s, where we were coming to now, you know, because some of the best propagandists that the elite have always used authors. You know. They make them stars, just like you make singers stars, a star-making machinery, or actors, you know. And this is a Bitchute, by the way. If you ever watched the documentary put out about the Unabomber, why he was attacking certain professors in particular university, it was because he said they were part of a system that was going to change society and literally control our minds, you know. And it came out during inquiries that these professors had been involved in psychedelics and drugs and strobes and so on, which are eventually used in discos, you know. A great documentary, to see that he was part of an experiment himself. And he was a professor, remember, Unabomber. But as a student, these same guys had experimented with him. And it came out during the documentary, which came out from Germany eventually. But when you see how far they'd gone then, and then some of these professors talked about it on the documentary. One of them belonged to a star-making machinery, he said, where we make scientists and the people you see on TV stars. You know how they give you the stars, you know, the professor who talks science and so on, and they give them these personas and backgrounds and fake reality backgrounds and so on, and make them stars. It's the same star-making machinery, the same ones that gave you Carl Sagan, by the way, and people believe them. Wow, these guys are brilliant. Yeah? They don't realize, they're almost actors, some of them. And the people follow what they say, though, meticulously, like their religious leaders. And that's how you control society. You put these characters out, make them into stars, and the people follow. That's why they call them the stars, even in Hollywood. People follow stars, you see. So you use them, you make them and you use them. Just like the CFR put Clooney in there, and Angelina Jolie and others. And they said in the CFR's own books, you know, Foreign Affairs or magazines, they were using them because people would follow what they said if they were on board with the agenda. So it works awfully well. And that's your whole TV is so incredibly weaponized today that youngsters who are brought up with it don't have much of a chance of breaking away from it at all. And that's also the terror machine for COVID. That without TV, people would have ignored it.
Well, I've said that to people in stores as well. I said, you turn off your television, and if you did, you wouldn't know there was anything wrong.
That's right.
You wouldn't notice anything. And
that's why, by the way, that 1 month or so, or 6 weeks in the summer, and I knew they would. I even said this back in February, that's what would happen. I said, they'll give you a break in the summer, rather than have total revolution, or counter-revolution, because it's part of revolution, you see. So they wouldn't have counter-revolution and go against it. And in those few weeks, you saw that the people started to smile again. You could read the faces of people because we communicate with a whole bunch of expressions and nuances and so on because we're human and we're social creatures. And when that's masked and you can't see it, it makes everyone else suspicious. You don't know what they're thinking, what are they feeling, are they pleasant, are they unpleasant? Well, you can't tell. It's meant to do this. They know this, you know. And so it breaks down communication. So in the few weeks in summer, they gave you a bit of freedom and a mask came off. The folk went right back to happiness. The social distance went out the window, and it was getting ignored. So they can't have it ignored because this is a big, big agenda. And it's nothing to do with COVID, actually. It's everything to do with the whole system. Yeah.
Yeah. My friend's living in Sweden at the moment. An English friend that I used to live with in the UK, and he's no intention to go back to the UK. He says this is like paradise compared to the UK.
Yeah.
He says there's absolutely nothing happening here. There's no masks, none of that, no social distances. There's not even signs out. There's nothing. And he's done a trip to Germany recently where even to get a cup of coffee, he had to give his name, address, where he was going, ID, everything, just to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I've got a guy on Sunday, actually, who's a friend of his, and he's going to be reporting on what's been happening in Germany with protests and stuff, so that should be interesting as well.
Sure.
But because he was in Sweden for a while as well with him, so he's got the contrast. But the school thing, if you were a parent and you were even remotely aware of what the WHO wants to teach your children in terms of sex education, and they said to you, you've got to sign this waiver so you're not going to be in the room when he's getting taught this, your alarm bell should be ringing off the wall.
Sure.
I mean, but they're not, apparently. They're just, people are signing this stuff. I mean, maybe they sign it and they're in the room anyway, but of course there's a camera on that computer, so you've got to stay out of sight of it. If you've signed that waiver, or they'll prosecute you. Supposedly, I don't know. But
it's been such a long time in the making, you see. Again, getting back to H.G. Wells in the 1920s, as a propagandist, he was made a star. He was recruited in the late 1800s, you know. He initially came out for free love, by the way, but back then, late 1800s, you know, at a time when they didn't have the abortion factories on the go. But that was part of the destruction of the family unit. And this amazing guy, H.G. Wells, was heavily promoted. He had all the help for his books from professors of all kinds at Oxford and so on, who would lay out all the details for his books. He was really a front man, and he was completely on board. Naturally, when you're well paid, you're on board with an agenda. And in his non-fiction books, he went really far with it all. He talked about the modern utopia and how, like you're going through a storyline with his friend on a holiday, and there was no private transportation. That's like Agenda 21. You could travel by bus and trains, and the general population with the lower IQs that weren't necessary anymore, all the working class, he says, we used to think we'd have to kill them, but we realized it's more humane just to sterilize them. And this is like a talking, walking walk through what they foresaw was going to happen. Don't forget that he worked with Julian Huxley and many others.
He also mentioned that carbon would be a currency, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. But well, he went through the whole agenda sexually. At the breakdown, because again he was all for the end of the family unit. Isn't it odd? It's the same agenda as the Communist Party. And who funded the Fabian Society that Wells belonged to too? And it's the Astor family, the biggest, richest folk on the planet at the time. And again, the Fabian Society was again this pretense, where they get the working classes to follow them. That was the idea of it. And so whenever you follow, I keep telling you folks, if you follow anything, you're being led up the garden path. Somebody's using you. And so they always give you the parties that's going to speak for you, you see. Just like they get the BLM, the Marxist groups, to speak for black folk in the States. So they're already made for you to follow.
They're all white.
I know, have you noticed it? I mean, it's just amazing. And they bust them in from state to state, according to where the riots to be. And they're paid mercenaries. And a lot of them, by the way, have been over there in Syria fighting with mercenaries over there. Yeah? As mercenaries.
Yeah, you mentioned H.G. Wells and the abortion industry and stuff. I think at one time he was one of Margaret Sanger's hangers-on, or lovers, whatever you want to call them.
That's right.
And what I'm seeing now, I made me think of the movie The Time Machine.
Yeah.
That was Wells as well. And the scene by the river, the person falls in the river.
Yeah.
And they're all just sitting about thinking, well, we can't swim, and the guy who's come back from the future, he's gone into the future. And he jumps in the river and rescues her, and they're going, what are you doing that for?
That's right.
What are you doing that for? She was obviously worthless. She couldn't swim. It's her own fault, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we are now. Nobody gives a damn what happens to anybody else, really.
Well, you're right, actually. Again, there was a case in the U.S., I think it was, on a train station, on a subway station. And some guy started raping a girl right in front of all the passengers on the platform. And everybody just stood around and took photographs of it with their cell phones. I mean, that's what it's going to come down to.
There's a case, one of the activists in Ireland, Gemma O'Doherty, I think it is, was violently assaulted by some thug just at the weekend there. She got arrested.
Yeah.
But as I say, like people stand about and watch this stuff and don't get involved, and they do so at their own peril because they'll be next. And it's like, was it Neiman said, and then they came for me, and there was nobody to stand up.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're living through a script right now, Neil, because, as I said, look at the build-up to the COVID with China, And at the time, there was nothing happening, supposedly, with all these videos in China that they weren't putting across the rest of the world to terrify you. And at the same time, you had Fauci saying, I don't think America's got, or the US has got much to worry about at that time, remember. You had all that happening. But when they let loose the toppling the statues, worldwide this happened. Come on here, worldwide? I mean, it started supposedly with shootings inside the US. But you aren't having that across Europe. So how come this organised group is allowed to go around toppling statues in the UK? And once again, it's all called protests, right? And most of them were migrants who had flooded in a few years earlier, into Britain. And they were warned at the time, these are our armies they're bringing in here. Well, this is all shown to the public to get you scared. This is why you're seeing all this stuff, and the build-up to all this, to get you terrified, to comply, because this is an internal army which the elite will use. We know who's funding them. And we know who the leaders are, by the way. They're well-funded agitators, and not just Marxists. They're mercenaries. A lot of the guys in Antifa, literally, as I say, have been over working with the groups that the US was employing to try to overthrow Syria for years. You had the ISIS, ISIL, and ICE, and all the other fancy names they gave them. All the same groups, really. So this is run by the world government. Let's put it that way. All this is run by the world. It's all stage play, theatre for the public, to terrify the public. Because when you add that shock to the COVID, right? This is another shock. My God, is this? They're going to overthrow the whole city of London, or what? This is how it appears on TV, perception management again. Then folk go into a shock state, literally shock. And when you're in shock, you can't think straight. You're more compliant. You'll do what you're told because you're fearful. This is stage managed, all of it, with professionals at the top.
Yeah, I think back to that the movie Children of Men, and at the end of that movie, they showed you these hordes of Muslims running through London, chanting Allahu Akbar, etc., etc., with Kalashnikovs, and they actually had nothing to do with the story whatsoever.
Yes, there you go.
Sure. They were just throwing it there at the end, and you know, where did that come from?
That's right.
That's what they showed you. This army of immigrants, basically well armed, obviously well funded to get all these weapons, marches through London, basically taking it over. Yeah. And we're now coming into a stage of total depression, and all these immigrants were supposedly brought in because there wasn't enough people to fill all the jobs. Yeah. Well, what jobs? What was the excuse now?
Of course.
I'm going to get a job.
Yeah. I know.
And they're still coming in.
Sure they are. Yeah. But remember, too, that isn't it amazing, the communist idea, or the Marxist idea, was eventual elimination of borders and the nation-state. Marx said eventually the nation-state will wither away. And at the same time, you've got the Royal Institute for International Affairs that runs what was called the British Empire, even today, the so-called Commonwealth nations. And they put placements, they decide who's going to be the heads of them, even to this day. Including India, they literally planned the whole system years and years and years ago, and published what they really do. And you're living through it, and folk are so ignorant of the facts, you know, that they can't believe it when it happens. You're living through a planned overthrow, takeover of your nation, and to go under a form of world government that you don't get a chance. It's a post-democratic system, according to WEF and the Club of Rome.
Well, yeah, I mean, TV news is terrorism, basically.
Sure.
I tried to look up and get some T-shirts and stuff like that to wear around, and I thought, it's just way too expensive. People are jumping on the bandwagon. It's like $30 for a T-shirt. I thought, that's just crazy. So I bought some white ones and an indelible marker. I'm just going to make my own for $4. And just write things on them and just walk around and see if I get a reaction, because I've got one that I did buy, which said, good people disobey bad laws. Yeah. And a lot of people have stopped and said, that's right. And I said, well, keep doing it.
Sure.
Keep doing it, because there's a lot of bad laws coming.
Oh, yeah.
And you better start disobeying them shortly, because if you don't, they'll get worse. But anyway, that's the side. We're living in an evil system. There's no doubt about it, and I don't understand how people can't see it when they look around the world and see what's happening. In relation to... people now are so immune, shall we say, to bombings of weddings and stuff in Afghanistan or wherever. They think, oh well, they must have been up to something. You know, they were getting married.
Yes,
you know, things like that, and they're just, it's just they're over there. Doesn't matter. But they don't understand that the same laws apply within America or Britain. They can come and bomb you anytime they want.
Sure, they can.
But it is evil. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, it's evil.
Oh, absolutely.
And what you were talking about on Sunday in regard to psychopaths, and some of the lads in Ireland, you know, religious connotations, etc., of demons, people being possessed by demons. And it made me think about, I was out mowing the grass today, and I was thinking about Culloden, and I've been there a few times. I'm not sure if you've been there or not in your lifetime.
Yeah, I've been there.
But it's one of those very, very strange places in Scotland, where you can't feel, if you're Scottish, I guess, I don't know how it is for people who aren't Scottish, but you can sense something went on there.
Yeah.
You can sense that whether it's in your blood or not, I don't know. But you get out of the car or whatever, and you stand there and you look across it, and you can imagine the slaughter that went on, and you get this overwhelming sense of sadness or
sure.
Empathy for the people that died there. But, I mean, on both sides, it doesn't really matter, but mass slaughter on both sides, predominantly the Scottish side, of course. But I thought about a psychopath going up there and standing there and smiling and thinking, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
This is fantastic, all this slaughter, blood and gore and stuff. And went back to what you were saying on Sunday about this possession kind of thing.
Sure.
And it's the total opposite of what I would feel. And I'm thinking, well, my feeling would be empathy.
Yeah.
For the people that were killed. And the psychopath's feeling would be joy, I guess. And maybe a wish to repeat that themselves and to be involved in that kind of thing. And in that sense, I don't know if that's where you were going with that conversation on Sunday or not, but in that sense, they are possessed by something.
Oh, yeah.
Because ordinary people would never, ever think that was a good thing. Not in any shape or form. It doesn't matter if that field was full of English soldiers.
Yes.
You still go up there and say, well, they were just poor lads conscripted and thrown into a battle they knew nothing about, basically, and they just left there slaughtered. It doesn't matter what side of the fence you were on. But a psychopath wouldn't care. He'd just see mass slaughter and he wouldn't care which side anybody was on.
That's right.
And get joy out of it, or get some, I don't know what the right word is, power, I suppose.
Yeah.
Feel some sense of power in themselves that they could maybe be involved in something like that. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that? Because you said you'd find the sense that yourself in some people that...
I've no doubt. I've no doubt at all about people like that now. Well, for instance, a good example is Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill wanted war. He was placed in there by again, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. He didn't even know the name of it at the time. He argued with the group that put him in, In Parliament, he came out with an argument. He says, we've got people running this country that we've never even heard of, he said. An organisation, he said, that we haven't even got a name for. Well, that was eventually put in Carl Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope. And the Anglo-American Establishment book. He went through it all. He said, he gave the history of it. And he said that he mentioned that Churchill too came out arguing about what they've been doing, because Churchill was still doing his pretense about Germany, try to play it, soften it a bit as he pushed ahead with for the war, and this other group that we now know as the Royal Institute for International Affairs. Before then, were called the Kindergarten Group, or Milner's Kindergarten, because he picked these guys and made them heads of countries like South Africa, and parts of India, to like viceroys. So anyway, he himself, Churchill, was a psychopath. A long history. Never made his lineage and the whole thing and his parentage. But the fact is, during the Boer War, he went over as a correspondent. You probably know that. And correspondents were not allowed to carry firearms because if they did that, they'd be put down as a combatant, and the enemy could slaughter you and anybody with you, or like on trains and so on. Well, he carried a Mauser, a semi-automatic pistol with him, a German one, and he did get folk killed when he started shooting at the people from the train, and of course they opened up on the train and killed a lot of people. But they made him a hero. But he was a psychopath, And his personal secretary put a book out called The Fringes of Power. It's interesting you read it, because the guy literally had a great time through the war. They had parties every night of the week, big meals and all the champagne and brandy, etc. And underground bases in different places and places outside London. It was just like an ongoing big party for Winston Churchill, who couldn't get out of his bed before noon, And but Churchill himself stated, and I gave it this talk years ago. He stated that He says, this war is wonderful. He says, we'll achieve our old dream of a united Europe. You know, but whose dream was this? Because you wouldn't find it in the general history books, but then you find it from Karl Marx. Isn't that odd, eh? How they both worked together to the same agenda. Marx talked about the creation of a united Europe with a parliament, a united Americas with a parliament, and a Far Eastern group under a parliament. The same bunch is today under free trade, NAFTA for North America, and they've changed the name of it again too, with the America, Canada, and Mexico. But it's the same group, you know. And the Far Eastern Rim group has members based in Japan and in China and Australia. So they've been working for the same agenda that Karl Marx was working towards. And under these three trading blocs will eventually merge under a singular world government. Well, it's happening. Well, how come the communists were all going the same road as the technocrats, as the same with the banks and the capitalists and so on, all going along in the same agenda? Because at the very, very top, it's obviously all one.
Well, you've got a bit of irony there, because you've got Edward Heath, the man who ran like Prime Minister in the UK on a ticket of we'll never join the European Union.
That's right.
The first thing he did was sign up, and they buried him next to Karl Marx.
And also Ted Heath, he also was a member of that group in Korea. What was his name? That had the cult for the weddings and everything, mass weddings. Remember that guru that in Korea. And he'd marry about 300 of his followers to members of the opposite sex on the same day, sort of thing. Ted Heath was a spokesman for that. He could pay millions of bucks for that, you know, after he got out of politics. But talking about him, what he said, the same thing happened in Canada. You had Chrétien, who was the Prime Minister, saying that he would never, you know, join a united Americas. And then once he was in it, said he's now the champion. Within a month, he's now become reconsidering it, he's now the champion of a completely integrated Americas. And then after that, you had Brian Mulroney, doing the same thing. He ran on the same ticket to take you out of it, you know, and he became the champion of it once he was in. So it didn't matter if it was liberal or conservative. It's all one agenda. They're all part of the game, you know.
Getting back to the evil and this type of possession, I think Gates is a perfect example of that, because when you see him talking, particularly the recent videos that have come out with him talking about injecting genetically modified organisms directly into the arms of babies, and you see him and his wife sitting next to each other, grinning like you know, cats that have found the cream, and they're clearly sick. They're clearly
these people literally. You feel it off them, you know. If you hadn't even heard them, you'd feel it. If you're in their proximity, I would feel it. And they radiate something. They radiate something that's very tangible.
Yeah, as you know, in the past, I had the dubious pleasure of hanging over David Rockefeller's shoulder at his dinner table, and you could feel it from him. He was.
Well, I remember, you know. I mean, again, Malachi Martin had a lot of failings, because he helped sink the Catholic Church to an extent with basically the reformation of it, the reforming of the Catholic Church in the 1960s. He literally was an enemy agent, but he also belonged to the CIA, you know. And he admitted that in a roundabout fashion on the Art Bell show years ago, when he talked about the fact that the CIA used Jesuits and other priests, because they were across the whole planet, you see, within communist countries and other countries and so on. So they would get information that was happening on the spot in real time. So they all worked together in some cozy relationship. But Malachi Martin himself was literally also being funded by a foreign power at one point. And yet, ironically, as he got into writing his books, as the Catholic Church was failing, because it got too materialistic. You see, don't forget that the priest can only be as staunch as the general public if you've got a worldwide attack intergenerationally on the culture of the public that they don't even know is an attack on them. They think it's called progressive, remember, by the other side. then they think it's all developing naturally, and with it comes science. Science becomes elevated to a high pinnacle to fill the void that spiritual matter is used to take, you see. And that's what's happened. That's where you've been bombarded with science and experts, like Bertrand Russell said, that they would do. They've done it. Well, the general people in the Catholic Church are only pulled out as priests from a very almost a secular society, which means they're tainted themselves. But Malachi Martin, after helping to destroy part of the natural traditions of the Catholic Church, who knows why, inadvertently restored something that was sorely. It was like giving water to folk in a drought. He started to touch on the spiritual side of things, you know, and it was an immediate success, because that's what folk crave. We know there's more to this world than just... if you believe in nothing but secular systems, you're finished. You won't beat it, you see.
I think that's part of what's going on in Ireland. There's a lot of speakers now, these peaceful protests until Antifa show up, talking about the fact that there are aborted babies and vaccines, etc., etc., sure. And it's getting people thinking more about the religious roots, if you like.
Well, once you get into Malachi Martin's books, like to the devil, was it the Hostage to the Devil? It's called. Yeah, Hostage to the Devil was that main one. We did Widswipe House and other ones too, but Hostage to the Devil was taken from real cases, verified by their priests. You know, it wasn't just made up. And he goes through the different things that happen to individuals with real heavy possession. And as he was discussing that too, that same book, he was discussing it on the Art Bell show years ago. He did mention that he had met, because Bell asked him, have you met anybody who's really heavily possessed? And took him to talk about perfect possession. And perfect possession, there's no fight or struggle between the person possessed and the spirit possessing them, or the demon, you know. It's a happy union. And he talked about the Kissinger types as an example. You know. I guess you could tack in the Brzezinski types too, or even Stalin types. You know. So he said that he gave an example of someone he'd worked with on and off over years in a library situation. And one day he just saw the guy from a particular angle, and it hit him what was odd about it. And then he realized this guy's possessed. And as he realized that, he said, the person he was talking about, that he knew, looked at him and smiled. He says, oh, you know. They know what you're thinking, you know, at times. And I call it reading. They can read you, you know. Sometimes you can read them as well. But definitely, I have no problem accepting the fact it exists. None at all. I've had too many experiences of it in other people.
You mentioned in the past that psychopaths smell the way the wind's blowing, and it's that type of thing. If they see they can take advantage of you, then they will.
Yes.
They can sense that you're a vulnerable person.
It isn't even. You know, it's not even a study of you. It's instinctive with them. They read you instantly. It's not even work to them, you know. And that's this odd gift. That is a gift, or is it a demonic gift, or what is it that makes them so quick to literally see right through? They know any chink in your armor, and they know how to exploit it immediately. If it's a woman they're after, a guy or a woman these days, they'll immediately know how to attract that person to them and get beyond their defenses. Instantly. It's pure instinct. Something tells them how to do it. So when you take the signs and symptoms of a psychopath on one hand of a page, one side of a page, and it's a long list, you know, because there's different categories of them, which is also similar. But the whole point is, the other side of the page, put down the signs and symptoms of someone who's demonically possessed, and you'll find they completely match. Complete. So that for the secular group, they're called psychopaths, and for the religious group, you call it demonic possession.
Yeah, well, as I say, you can see it in Gates now. I mean, more clearly than
yeah.
I think perhaps now he's at that he's looking over the field of Culloden and he thinks he's won.
Yes.
And he thinks, this is it. This is my day in infamy. I'm going to live this. I'm going to survive to see my dream come true, kind of thing.
Sure.
And that's what it's like. And he's not an old man. I guess he's got another 40 years or so to live with the good healthcare and everything he gets.
Oh yeah.
But he's certainly going to see his dream come to fruition unless he's stopped.
It's a great example, actually. He is a great example of someone who is perfectly positioned. You can see behind, even on a clip from a television. I don't have TV, but I get clips sent to me on the internet and so on. But you can see in the guy's eyes that they're furtive. They're constantly moving with that fixed expression he puts on as he's been asked questions. It's an agile mind. But behind the mask of it, you could actually see there's something else definitely in the guy. There's no doubt about it to me. And to be involved in what he's involved in as a front, definitely he's a front. He's a higher player, but he's still in the front. He's a worker bee. The real guys at the top are not work. They don't work at all. They're not worker bees, and they don't have to be accessible to the public. But here's the key to this too. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours and hours giving you examples, but here's the key to it. If you go into this World Revolutionary Party, for instance, we know that Mazzini was given the right. He was actually approved by the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Albert Pike at the time in the States, which wasn't from Scotland at all, by the way, really. But he approved Mazzini to go over and take over the World Revolutionary Party across Europe, and he did, And lots of books put out by him, or for him at least. Most folk could get ghostwritten books in the revolutionary parties, even down through the centuries. But eventually, we know that Lenin took over, and then eventually it branched off from Bolshevik into communism, you see. It's all the one movement. And if you look at Madame Blavatsky, who also was from Russia, I remember, who grabbed some of the Masonic occultic terminology, etc., and put out theosophy, blending it with India. Very interesting, that too. And she says, why are you taking really mainly India as an example, or Hinduism? And she said that, and this was part of the Revolutionary Party, that she said she was a member of, remember? And Alice Bailey, it's always ABs that take over. Alice Bailey was one of them. And Blavatsky, of course, was an HB, but the other two ones were famous, were almost AB types. And one of them was a founding member, one of the famous was a founding member, along with H.G. Wells, and George Bernard Shaw, of the Fabian Society. So you're looking at a tradition of international revolution, which he boasted he'd been part of. And at the same time, she said, our goal was blending it from India, not just for a mass migration from India down the road. Our goal is also to blend the spirit with science. When you look at all these characters in technocracy, with the Bill Gates types and all the other ones working, look at even Epstein. Definitely a frontman for a massive operation for honey traps and so on, and blackmail. And we know lots about that. But regardless, Epstein himself was so interested in genetics and eugenics, and also with science. He put big money towards groups in MIT, for instance, who got the first information on scientific projects. Incredibly interested in science, and in the future going into this idea of immortality. And I gave a talk in the 90s about this actually. I said, what is a demon? A demon, technically, is a bodiless entity, a powerful entity, but bodiless nonetheless. What does it crave the most? It craves a body to inhabit. The fallen angel's idea in religion was to do with those that were cast down, the rebels. And you'll find today, and all the occultic and exoteric groups out there that run the world, they talk about Lucifer being a champion, along with Eve, breaking the rules to create progress. What's the mantra of the left? It's called progressiveness, and progressive. destroying the rules, rebuilding society, rebuilding that which was left imperfect, which is the world and humanity. That's the mantra of them all. So anyway, you go into this idea of a demon, a fallen angel, a rebel. 2 million supposedly were cast down out of the 6 million. And they can go in and out of different bodies that accept them. You have to accept a demon in, you see. And so through the New Age, you get lots of folk wanting power. That's where they go into it, you see. And they become possessed themselves. But the ones at the top go through all these different rituals amongst themselves to bring in the higher demons. There's intelligence, like ranks in the military. Different intelligences, you see. So what do they crave the most? Perpetual. A demon wants perpetual existence in this world. Immortality. In a body that will not die, you see.
You talked about everything. There's a little clip of him when he was supposedly starting to be questioned about his activities, and he has the same grin on his face as if he knows he's immune from anything.
Yeah.
Nobody's touching him. And Jimmy Savile was exactly the same.
Yes.
When people spoke to him, you could see that kind of malicious look on his face.
Yeah.
And he knew he was defensive. He had his backers to police it himself, and he was untouchable.
He said he was untouchable, Jimmy Savile.
Yeah.
And that documentary that was it Truro put out there. He said that. He says you can't touch me. And just round from Savile's house, by the way. And again, had this odd thing too, the fixation with their mothers and things. I mean, Savile literally treated his mother like a goddess. And but around the corner from his house was where one of those who was it did the murders, the man and the woman there.
It was Yorkshire, Fred West.
Yeah.
Was it Fred West?
I think it was. Well, it's one of them anyway. Was it the Moore one? There's also the Moore murders. But anyway, it was just right in the corner of where his house is. That happened. It makes me wonder, and it's an awful wonder too, was he having communication with Savile back in and out and all the rest of it, Who knows?
The police actually took his dental records at one point because there was teeth marks on that body that was found in his home.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so I mean, they knew he was involved. I think. He visited the guy in Broadmoor.
Yes.
It wasn't Fred West. It was I can't remember the guy's name now.
Yeah, another psychopath.
Yeah. But he visited him in Broadmoor, and they became friends apparently. I think they were friends before that.
Sure. But when you're talking too about say graveyards or battlefields, Scotland wasn't just a battle. That last battle of Culloden. It was predicted long before it. I mean, that area was called Dromossie Moor, and Culloden was a later a term that they gave just before not long before the battle. You had Culloden House, for instance, but Dromossie Moor was the actual area, and the Brehon seer, he was a seer, because that was a Celtic thing, where you had folk that weren't possessed, but they had a link to higher power, which Malachi Martin did mention too, and it's true in Catholic theology. Certain people have gifts given to them. They don't seek it, People who seek gifts generally are looking for demons to possess them, but some folk have certain abilities or sixth senses. And Culloden is almost the culling of Odin, and the Odin is again the northern peoples. But the Brehon seer in the 1500s was a great prophet that different clansmen used to go to for advice and so on. And he talks about the place that would eventually have the black rain, he called it. Well, that's oil, and the oil rig's not far from that site, down at on the coast there, in the northeast, with an American company that ran at the time, McDermott it was. But the Brehon seer talked about the place that eventually would have the black rain. He said before that, the flower of Scotland, the young men, would have their last battle on Dromossie Moor, 200 years before it happened. And that's exactly what did happen. It's never been explained why on earth Charlie and the armies came right up to that particular spot. Because Highlanders never charged on the flat, boggy ground on foot, you know. But they did it. It made no sense at all. And what you realise, this was a planned thing too. It was already planned. We know that even going back to the MacDonald slaughter that happened with the Campbells, that were an army that worked for the English king. They were sent in to meet the MacDonald clan, and eventually came in as friends and guests, and they're put up, and they got the orders to slaughter the folk at night. They put them up, all the actual MacDonalds, and they did that. It's never been forgiven to this day. So they've never trusted the English or British army, or folk employed of the British army. But actually at Culloden, that was the final one.
The king
had decided to eliminate the whole Highland race, actually. And so it started at the battle, but they went through for like 50 years slaughtering the folk across the Highlands, you know, and islands, man, women, and children. Massive genocide.
Yeah. It's interesting. The Campbells actually set up this town that I live in now, in the States. So yeah, just a coincidence. And they've got murals actually up on the walls in some of the downtown areas showing the tartans and stuff.
Sure.
But anyway, is there anything else you want to mention on that, the demonic side, or?
Yeah, well, the demonic side is too. It's the ones that, even getting back to Culloden. I mean, it was the Duke of Cumberland. That was really from part of this Prussian-German group that came over and became the royalty of Britain. He's given all the accolades for slaughtering the Highlanders, but he said it too. He says, "Let none of them live, man, woman, or child." This was a psychopath. He went down in history as a hero for London, you know, and royalty. A man who had no compassion of any kind at all, and you talk about real planned genocide that was published, you know, and even in their letters, which they still have today, from the king to him. Absolutely, you can't fathom that, and you wonder what. I used to say to people who come to Scotland, they say, "Oh, what a wonderful Highlands," and so, they say it's so roomy, eh? I say, yeah. I say, that's because millions of folk were slaughtered that used to live here.
Yeah. I was saying to somebody else the other day that somebody was talking about Black Lives Matter and saying, they want reparations there. I said, well, the Scots have been slaughtered for centuries. I said, maybe we should claim some money off the English.
There you are. You know. And here's the problem too, though. A good part of the English army that fought at Culloden for London were part of the British army. They were Scottish. That Lowland Scots Greys and so on, they were part of the English regiments. So once again, they can divide up a country and get part of them fighting the rest of them for money. It's a wonderful thing keeping folk in poverty, because young guys always join the military. It's almost instinctive. Think nothing else is there. And
again, that's where we're going again, isn't it? Because people are going to be so poor, and the military will be dangled in front of them as a way to get out of poverty. Or you can send money back to your family as you're starving back.
That's exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, let's move on to something else you mentioned, coming this winter, the winter of discontent.
Yeah.
Now, I remember when that phrase was out back in the 70s, with the power cuts. I was only a young lad then.
Yeah.
Mid-70s, 73, 74, something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember the blackouts, the 3-day week. The television went off at 8 o'clock right after Coronation Street, of course, because they had to get the soap opera in there. And, that was a bad time, and we were basically rationing food at that time. My parents, it was 4 of us, 4 children, and they struggled to make ends meet, and that's exactly where we're headed to now, if we're not already there.
Yes.
In many parts of the States and Britain, and parts of Europe, of course, as well, Australia, New Zealand. Yep. And it's funny that the most draconian legislation is all in the colonies.
Yes.
The former colonies, New Zealand and Australia have been awful. I mean, they're even worse than Britain is at the moment. Yeah. But, the winter of discontent.
Well, they wanted to get everything that happens in a wartime scenario is being put on the table and introduced step by step, including down to rationing. Don't forget, let's just jump from here. Let's never forget the past, the build-up to this, where the Club of Rome were given the task it's a big think tank for the WEF and for the Royal Institute for International Affairs. They are the main think tank for the future, planning the future, and techniques to implement it. And they came up with not just limits to growth, etc. That was also parted by Maurice Strong, all these global players, but also they came up with how to unite the planet to convince the public to stop consuming and go into almost a post-consumerist society. The Club of Rome, by the way, from its very inception by well-known players against the general population, eugenicists and so on, the Club of Rome have stated from the beginning that democracy would never work. That was one of their main goals, was to replace democracy with an efficient technocratic system of running the populace, which is massive, really heavy socialism, And they said that they were given the task to unite the planet. So they looked at all different ways to get the public to unite and give up their rights, you see. And they said that the climate is what they picked. They said global warming, famine and drought and the like would fit, and pestilence would fit the bill. Man, therefore, is the enemy of the planet, and so they'd have to direct all the arrangements and agreements and organizations against reducing the population. And that's what you've had been hammering at ever since the 1970s.
Yeah, well, we've had the climate thing, which didn't work. Now we're getting the pestilence to begin the climate.
But that's what they said.
What?
Recently, I put up on my site too, links to the council, the COR, Club of Rome, where there's a woman that's the head of it now, and she said that we're going to achieve all this is wonderful, we can achieve all the sustainability and greening goals under the COVID umbrella. And so right now, and even in the last few days, again, they keep repeating it, they said that no company would be allowed to restart and open up again unless it's green and sustainable. Which tells you there's obviously a group above them who's going to decide if you're green and sustainable.
Yeah, and in fact, the reason the pubs are closed in Ireland as well, I guess, because people talk there. But apparently it's the only country in Europe where the pubs are still closed.
Yes.
It's Ireland, funnily enough.
Isn't that amazing?
But, yeah. But I guess I'd say we've had the climate change. We're in the middle of the pandemic pestilence, and the famine and drought still to come, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Maybe there's always.
And don't forget, we've had stacks and stacks of information and meetings and university meetings and Harvard meetings and publications about the geoengineering they've been doing since, pretty well daily since the 1998. That's when they started the daily stuff, So bringing on a famine or floods is quite as child's play today. We've watched it. Those who've got eyes to see have watched it for years as they lace the skies with these trails and so on. Then the weather changes. This is old stuff. But they have meetings about it, always pretending if we do this down the road to save the world, it might have fallout on the public, But in reality, they've been doing it all along.
Yeah. There's been so many articles out recently about food recalls. Mm-hmm. Particularly beef, like thousands of tons of beef being recalled for some spurious reason.
But isn't that interesting, though? Here's something we've got to remember this. Whatever's to happen here, we saw happening in China under the trial before we got it. And remember all those thousands of tons of meat at the docks in China there, left to rot. Same thing, this is months ago. Months and months ago, January, February, that was happening. So that was all the trials to see how they could work things, and then they did immediate surveys on the populace to see if they went along with it and accepted it. And, any problems where they wouldn't go along with it, how would you get around those problems? How would you fix those problems to get folk to accept stuff? They tried it all out in the Chinese before they're putting it out here. All of it.
Yeah, well, that's what I've seen recently. The massive thousands of tons of beef, peaches, onions, lemons. Mm-hmm. All like the vitamin C stuff, as I say, the beef, etc. Chickens, of course.
That's right.
Going after them as well. And it's you've dragged out Attenborough again, and the other one, that comedian Stephen Fry. Extinction Rebellion being all over the Guardian this week. Let's go out and protest. They're all out protesting now, but that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Mm-hmm. They wear masks because they might want to do something violent and not be recognised. But that's okay. That's okay. I'm sure you saw the one in the States where literally the city was on fire behind the guy, and he's going, there's a few fires, but it's mainly peaceful.
It's mainly peaceful, that's right. And and you could even hear gunshots in there too, in the extended version of that clip.
It's madness, but people are falling for it.
Well, it's gaslighting. It's the gaslighting, isn't it? Yeah. Even and it's so much. See, here's the key to it. Eventually, the public, through training, through television, and experts would be trained that they couldn't trust their own intuition and observance of things, and their own opinions that were formed from what they were experiencing. You wouldn't trust them anymore. And lots of folk are like that. They'll see on TV exactly the opposite of what they're experiencing, but they'd rather believe the TV version because they've been trained to believe in authority speaking through that little tube.
Yeah, I don't understand how anybody can look at Bill Gates talking about injecting genetically modified organisms directly into the arms of babies, and he's making the motions with the needle.
I know.
And he's smiling as he does it. His wife's.
Well, never mind that. I mean, look at the massive lawsuits that were in against him across India and Africa for giving polio to the people that he was giving the vaccines to, and things like that. You know? I mean, these are, look into the India Times and different in newspapers in India. They've got stacks of information on this. This is real stuff. And I can remember when Bill Gates grew up, and again, who gives him the right to go across the planet testing experimental vaccines on people? I mean, they bribe the tribesmen and the leaders and so on, and that's how they can get in there. And of course, because there's no real media in the areas, there's no voice of the people who get infected with these things. This has been on the go for years and years and years. And but when he went into India and other parts of Africa too, he was given some of them a live vaccine that was in the spray form for oral, you know. And it turns out the World Health Organization, I don't know if they've scrubbed it yet on their own sites, but I kept all this stuff from years ago. The World Health Organization eventually had to come out and admit that they'd introduced it became a new live strain of polio in those peoples that they couldn't control, you know, with the present vaccine. Whatever they introduced was a modified version of the virus. And it says
apparently that's the only strain that's still going.
That's right.
In some parts of India.
Now they call that the wild virus, but the old
vaccine.
Yeah, this is how the game is played. But this guy literally, he's a psychopath. I mean, he never answers a question directly. He just skips around everything, and his hands are going all the time. You know, and you do wonder what's in that body, that physical body, because it's like it doesn't know how to control the gestures. But I was thinking too of Fauci. I mean, Fauci's wife, you know, is a eugenicist, and she's into what do they call it now? To do with
bioethics.
Bioethics. She runs a bioethics organization for the States under the president, by the way, and gets millions of bucks sent to them too. And they're deciding through the Rockefeller Foundation. You probably saw their big presentation to the president a few months ago, where they said, here's the whole unrolling of the agenda using bioethics and bioethical lawyers to manage the general population, and right down to life and who gets medication, who won't get medication, etc. You talk about psychopaths. There's regiments of them now.
When you look back at you mentioned the antitrust laws earlier, and of course Bill Gates was prosecuted under that before. But when you look at that clip of him being questioned, and he's asked if he's concerned about something, and he replies something like, "What do you mean by concern?"
I don't.
and his accent, everything is completely different to what it is today.
Yeah.
His whole demeanour is completely different, and it's just like Rockefeller has been made into this philanthropist and remodeled.
Yes.
You know, but he's still got the silly jumpers and the daft haircut and stuff like that to make him look like a geek.
Yes, and yet he was no computer geek. He's a businessman. The partners that started up the company, Microsoft, who all say the same. He was just a businessman.
Yeah, so was it Paul Allen? can't remember the guy was.
That's right.
And he tried to steal his...
yes, he did.
He tried to steal his money at the end, and the guy's dying of cancer.
That's right.
But, yeah.
Yeah. And the key is, too, though, you see, Bill Gates grabbed a lot of stuff, that programs, etc., from IBM. And so Gates already was a front man from the world, I call it the World Corporation. The real group that runs the planet, because it's untouchable. They do what they want with impunity. They really do. I mean, as I say, no one's going to go after him. No one's going to go after Soros. In fact, they'll hammer you for mentioning his name. But the fact is, I mean, to hear a person advocating what really is the overthrow of the U.S. congressional system, whether you like it or not, makes no difference. He's advocating insurrection along with the top politicians, and no one is going after him. All these youngsters in the streets are taking their commands from hearing speeches by guys like that as an authority, you know.
As I say, if you and I stood in a soapbox in Parliament Square or something and said, right, we're going to overthrow the government,
yes.
and we're going to leave this city in ashes, we'd never see the light of day again.
No, you wouldn't. So it tells me there is already the world governmental system, and the World Bank is all part of it. Don't forget the World Bank is part of on the board of the WEF, you know. Private bank, eh?
Yeah, well, that's another question you can never get answered. Why do governments borrow money from a private bank? No one can answer that one.
Well, it's magicians, you see.
Yeah.
Because if you or I counted up the debt and income of countries, we'd say, my God, we owe billions and trillions and trillions. But these guys are magicians. That's why they bring them in from other countries into the States, the Federal Reserve. And wherever they see the stuff that would freak you out, they have no problem with that. They can fix it all, you know. They're magic, you see. Because it's nothing to do with accounting, obviously. It's pure magic, yeah. It's completely bogus. I mean, there's nothing backing anything.
No, it's
nothing.
amazing. I was walking down the lake the other morning there, and the city council has got these guys cutting all the grass there, and they're all on the best possible tractors you could ever have. All the John Deeres, you know, every one was brand new, and you're thinking, hold on a minute, it's really a way to save money here. This is outrageous. You know? There's cheaper tractors than that.
Yes.
All they do is cutting grass. They're not digging or anything. You know,
that's right. Yeah.
You know, and somebody's got a backhander somewhere, some showroom somewhere that sells John Deere's, a friend or somebody.
Yeah.
And that's how that works. But as I say, even you could tell, being in that city hall a few weeks ago, myself and Paula, you could tell the whole place is corrupt. You could just tell, you could sense it. And you know they're not listening to you.
No.
And you're not going to make any difference to what they vote and what they don't vote. But as I say, I think it's important to make your voice heard so they can't claim they didn't go later.
It is. Here's the key again. When you see all the left-wing politicians in the States literally sworn allegiance to this overthrow of the U.S. government. Literally, you know, and they've already said it. Pelosi said it, and Hillary Clinton said it. They're not going to accept any verdict from Trump about Trump. And another one too, the one that Harris they're putting up there. She said too a few days ago that this rioting and destruction is not going to end with Trump, or even if they get it, it's going to continue right through the year. I mean, what is this we're listening to here?
Yeah, we've got a little speakeasy bar here, which we're actually going to go to after the show. But people are a bit more open-minded there for some reason. I don't know why. They just are. Nobody wears masks, nobody social distances or anything. It's just a little shoehorn bar. Everybody gets along.
But again, back to the key. The key is so important, is that they're all on board with this exact same agenda, not for the good of the country. They're all paid off, obviously. They're all part of another organization, obviously, that's above your federal government. And I've no doubt in that whatsoever. Also, you look at the sustainability groups that started to graft themselves onto even local councils over the last 20 years. All ex-civil servants taking early retirement, moving to areas, and then graft themselves onto local councils to do with sustainability. So, you know, we didn't vote them in. They just all appeared. And now that they've made their agreements, no matter what happens, if the states like the US refuse to go along with the sustainability or the climate change agreement, they're passing it state by state themselves. because they've grafted themselves onto the governments.
Yeah.
And who are they working for? Someone's at the top, paying them all.
Well, that's my next visit to the City Hall to speak on whatever issue it is. I'm going to ask them who they're working for.
Yes.
Because they're clearly not working for anybody in the room.
Absolutely.
But as I'm saying, there's one guy there who's adamant that this is all going to be over in November after the election. And I've said to him, I says, look, and he's a friendly guy, we chat away, and he doesn't wear a mask to the store and all that kind of thing. And I say, look, we'll have a different conversation after November, because it ain't going to stop. This is going on and on and on. And you mentioned Kamala Harris, and of course, she had to admit, or her father had to admit, that her ancestors were slave owners.
That's right.
So why don't Black Lives Matter go after her first?
Exactly. And these are telling points, because it's nothing to do with what was portrayed by the media. It's a different... This is a big organisation. There's a global organisation that has so much of the power that runs pretty well every country in the planet right now. Not them all completely, but this is the big fight. And I've said it. They sort of said at the WEF. I mean, they brought him back on to give it the special speech, and he said, "We've got to get Trump must be removed completely." He says, "Well, he's telling the richest people on the planet that this man has to be removed. Whether you like him or not, it makes no difference. The fact is, they're advocating insurrection and overthrow of another country, and you're funding it."
Yeah, that would be classed as a threat if I said it.
Yes, it would be, or anybody else for that matter.
Yeah. But what was it? I was going to say something else. Ireland again. I think. Well, no, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to go on to the WF, supposedly delayed their next meeting in Davos till June, apparently. Do you think there's anything in that, or is that just a smoke screen?
It's a smoke screen. These guys are the busiest guys. They are technically a world government, and they have their own on their own website. They've been training folk for the last 50 years to be world leaders. I mean, that's what they pick children and they groom them to be leaders of all different areas of sustainability and politics, etc. So no, they're not some simple little NGO here. This is a multi-trillion-dollar organisation set up again by a leading technocrat of his time, and he was, a technocrat, and he still is. He's at Schwab. So this is the system they want to bring in is a managed from birth to grave as a system for every individual on the planet, and eventually the gradual eradication of the useless eaters, as Bertrand Russell called them.
Yeah, I mean, I saw somebody reporting on they've delayed the meeting because they're behind schedule and what they want to do. And I'm thinking, well, these guys don't get behind schedule.
Remember what Bertrand Russell said, and he was a member of the Macy group, the Frankfurt School, and the groups that were put in there after FDR and Truman to help create a new culture for the Americas. And he said that by diet, injection, and injunction, we shall alter the world. And control the people. Yeah,
and of course, as going along with the food scarcity that was thrown out there and the food recalls, they're also pushing the vegan stuff and the Beyond Meat and all that. All over the place.
Yes, sure.
Every day there's stuff coming out about it. The best ways to go vegan, the best ways to do this, and all that nonsense.
And eat crickets, eat crickets and bugs,
Yeah, and these guys eat the best beef on the planet.
Yes. Exactly.
Anyway. So, we've done our 2 hours eventually, after our technical problems.
It flew in.
Hopefully you got that. Hopefully you got that. Well, we could go on and on and on, but people won't listen for more than this.
I know.
But we'll maybe do it again next month.
Sure.
But hopefully you got it recorded and we got it recorded, and between us we can get it out anyway.
Yeah, see if you can get yours up first, and I'll look into it, and I'll look at this recording here and see if it's working.
Okay, great.
Okay, doke.
Okay, I've actually it's in the other room, but I've actually got one of Malachi Martin's books, and I can't remember the title of it. I started reading it once, and then I got onto something else, but I can't remember what it's called. But, I'll send you an email and tell you and let you know that I've got this recording done or whatever.
Okay, doke. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
That's been terrific.
And I'm still trying to get a source for yeast, but I can't get somebody to reply to me to say, are you posting it Canada Post or whatever? Don't get back to you. And the one I got before, I think that was just a scammer, because you then refused to send me a tracking number for the package sent to the post office. So.
Sure.
But as far as I know, Ian's sending you stuff from Ireland.
Yeah, anybody sending anything to me has to send it by regular post, because UPS and FedEx won't deliver here because it's an unorganized township, they call it, you know. And so we won't toe the line and just buckle under. So regular post gets here, and even then, don't expedite it or insure it, because it always arrives. The post always arrives.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that, because I'm still on the list for UPS this year, and hopefully I'll get started with them in September, October.
Yeah.
But they've been employing a lot of people in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Recently.
Well, the UPS, you see, don't deliver outside the cities, even though they say if you've got an address, we shall deliver. They're lying, because I've had battles with them for years, where they've kept stuff sent to me, generally at Christmas time. And they won't deliver. They won't even phone you up to tell you there's something, even in the head office, even though it's maybe 25 mile away. You know, you're supposed to go and get it yourself. So what's the point when I have to go a 50-mile round trip for a pair of socks or something? Yeah. Which, by the way, they had signed out to somebody else. I said to them last Christmas, I said, "You have a good Christmas." I says, "I'm sure you've plundered enough of the customers' goods." Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, they deliver out to the rural areas here, but of course there's no snow on the roads. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's pretty easy.
Well, even in the summer they won't do it here. Yeah.
Well, they've certainly employed enough people to be able to do it, I'll tell you, because I get the email every day about the posts available, and particularly even around Ontario, where you are, they've employed a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, we'll call it a day of that then, won't we?
Okie doke.